Outback Stories.
Outback Stories celebrates the pioneering spirit of Australia. It makes little difference if your family came on the first fleet or on a leaky boat last week. Our unique national identity was born and bred in the Outback. These are your stories.
From the earliest days of colonial settlement, teamsters or carriers hauled anything and everything over rough bush tracks until, eventually, those byways earned their stripes as roads. Their drays or wagons were pulled by horses, mules, or bullocks. These were tough times, tough on man and beast. Being on the road was fraught with danger. Drivers were scared of bail-ups, snakes and spiders, and the inevitable busted axles and wheels. As the country opened up, regular transportation networks developed, but originally, carriers would travel great distances, delivering much-needed supplies and returning with timber, coal and produce. The discovery of gold in the 1850s sent the colonies topsy-turvy and demanded regular deliveries of equipment, especially tents, clothing, mining cradles, shovels, pans and, of course, medicines and food. As the tent cities became towns, building equipment, newspaper printers, and general hardware were demanded. As if sent insane by the gold fever, even ice, fish, and oysters were transported to the faraway goldfields of Ballarat, Bendigo, and Hill End. With agricultural development, especially in wool, wheat and timber industries, long-haul transport was entrusted to the teamsters, who would take huge loads over mountains and across plains. This was particularly vital at times when the inland river systems were flooding or in drought.
You often hear complaints in the present time of rough, boggy or potholed roads, but I'm telling you, the worst roads of today are better than the best of those days.
Horse teamsters and bullockies took pride in their wagons by painting them brightly. The immense axle and massive wheels painted in the regulation red and blue, and on the side whimsical names like Don't Be Shy, Gypsy Queen, Dancing Girl, and Sarah Bernhardt, named for the famous actress. Some names were defiant, like I'm Coming and Never Get Stuck. Many of today's long-haul truckers carry on this custom, giving their prime movers distinctive names. The bullocks and horses were also given names. Rowdy, Red, Blucher and Nobby were four of the most popular bullock names. Horses were often named Daisy, Nugget or Brumby.
For bullock bells at night keep me wake till daylight. You can get no sleep at the mill.
The bullocks wore bells so they could be easily located. Originally, they were cast iron bells from England and then later locally made Condamine, Morgan and Menike's bells. Every bell had a distinctive sound, but most people would probably think they sounded the same. but to the men who worked the bullocks, they knew the difference, and they could locate their bullocks wherever they were.
Horses wore them too, and hated the jarring, hard, metallic sound, like a hammer on an anvil. Robert Meneke, a blacksmith of Wagga Wagga, had a perfect ear for bells. It was claimed his could be heard from 6 miles away at night. Whatever other bells a teamster had, he usually had a Meneke bell for the straggler and the leader. The Bullockies had regular meeting places, perhaps a good waterhole or near a grassed paddock. Many the yarn is told of dodging the squatter's boundary rider when the only water or feed was in his paddocks. Bells would be taken off the bullocks as they were led quietly, as if on tiptoe, into green pastures at night, and mustered out again in the early morning.
Bullockies had a reputation for hard swearing. The truth was, when a team was bogged, they had to move this 40 ton of muscle, so they tried the whip, but it was commonly believed that if the whip didn't work, the best way to move the bullocks was a bit of hard swearing.
Come here, Rattler, G-Bag, Brown, Holy Ghost, I'll knock you down. Heave, bend and buster, stand up round, you bloody swine, I'll make you groan.
Bullockies and teamsters relied on their lead bullock or horse. They would yell to the leader, "Come here, Red, shoulder down," and the leader would encourage his teammates to shift. How one particular horse or bullock knew its name in a big team is mystifying.
I once heard about a bullocky who never once used a curse or a swear word. Get up on the dray and shout, "Come on! Get up, you rectangular hypotenusers! Come on, you horn parallelograms! Get up!"
Another feature of the teamster's life was his dog. A bullocky travelling without a dog would have been like travelling in the Sahara Desert without a water bottle. The dog was a vital part of the carrier's team and was expected to work just as hard. A good dog, in many cases, was more useful to the carrier than a man. Some dogs would do almost everything except yoking up, but even in that direction some were very skilled.
If there were 500 bullocks in a paddock, good dogs could sort out of the 500 their owners' bullocks and not make one mistake.
And if a carrier had spare bullocks following his team, the dog kept them coming along all day without any bossing, and not unduly hasten them. He would let them get a feed as they went along, and the carrier had no worry about them at all.
I'm used to punching bullock teams across the hills and plains. I've teamed out back these 40 years in blazing droughts and rains. I've lived a heap of trouble down without a bloomin' lie, but I can't forget what happened me 9 miles from Gundagai.
The legendary dog on the tuckerbox originated with an 1850s poem, Bullockie Bill, and was popularised in song versions much later as 9 miles from Gundagai, including a version with the dog doing much more than sitting on the tuckerbox. The truth is, dogs were often left on drays if the bullocky had to go to town to get any repairs done. The dog sat there to let it be known the bullocky would be returning. Time on the track was metered, and most bullockies typically made 10 miles a day. Yoked in teams from 14 to 16, the teams would pull incredibly heavy loads, plodding over mountains, through swamps, and over sticky black soil plains on unmade bush tracks, and often no track at all. Urged on by the Bullockies' snapping 10-foot green-hide whip and shouts of encouragement. Bullocks could pull loads over rough country where horses would be crippled and motor traction impossible.
Dust, dust, dust. Along the roads there's nothing there but dust, dust, dust.
Over mountain ranges, down foothills, across plains, out onto the Darling, round to Wilcannia, and into every nook and corner of the west, north and south, the teams spread out, planting settlements in their wake. In the timber and wool industries, the working bullock was indispensable. Although seen in folklore as a hard-drinking, cursing, whip-cracking, larger-than-life character, the typical bullockie or teamster was more likely a quiet, unassuming, capable man, an expert bushman with a rare capacity for hard work and minding his own business. They were usually generous and hospitable to a fault, and willing to share their last bit of tucker with the needy. Hardships, such as boggy roads, wet camps and flooded rivers, were only met to be overcome.
It's frustrating work and tiring. The only joy comes with the check at the end of the job. And then there's the dust and mud. If it's raining, you get bogged, and if it's dry, you get dust. You can't win.
Many bullock teams had a spurter, a saddle horse that travelled behind the wagon. They were so called because many were race horses and were often sold, their origin never questioned, or, more often than not, raced in a local carnival. News soon spread by Cobb and Co. that teamsters were arriving with horses they wanted to race. A good racing horse, a dark horse, could be a good side earner pitched against the local favourites. Scratch pulling was also a favourite gamble. One horse pulling against another, sometimes with a loaded wagon with locked wheels. An equine tug-of-war. Occasionally, teams of bullocks were pitched against each other in a bovine version of scratch pulling.
I once knew a bullockie called 80 Mile Mick. We used to call him 79 Mile Mick for short.
When they met at roadside camps, the Bullockies inevitably got to yarning about their profession. A few nips of rum encouraged champion liars and their outrageous leg-pulling yarns. Inevitably, some argued about the legendary number of wool bales that were carried, and others argued about the weight of the load. Every detail was considered. It is easier to carry 70 bales of greasy wool than 100 bales of scoured wool. 2 bullocks abreast is better than 4, etc. These are the same men who would gamble on 2 blowflies on a pub table, which one would fly off first. Eventually the teams gave way to trucks and trains, and another part of Australia's colourful colonial history slowly disappeared.